was 2019. A physician in Phoenix, Arizona sat at his desk, staring at a patient file that refused to make sense. He read the numbers once, then again, then a third time, slower, as if the data might correct itself under pressure. It didn't. The patient was 74 years old, but the muscle density, the strength markers, the lean body composition, those belonged to a man at least 20 years younger. He leaned back, exhaled, then reached for the phone. "Can you come look at this?" Minutes later, a colleague stood beside him. She scanned the report, paused, and then laughed. Not disbelief, not sarcasm. The kind of laugh that escapes when reality breaks the rules you were trained to trust. Because this wasn't supposed to happen. Not at 74. The patient's name was Bob Harris. And 6 years earlier, Bob had been told something very different in a very different office. That his body was done. That muscle loss at his age wasn't just expected, it was permanent. That what he was losing would not come back. That the goal now wasn't rebuilding, it was managing decline. Bob had nodded politely. Men like him always did. He drove home, sat in his truck, engine off, hands on the steering wheel, and stayed there longer than he needed to. Because something didn't sit right. Not fear, not denial. Something quieter. A refusal. No one saw the decision happen. No one heard it. But in that silence, Bob chose something his doctor never gave him, a different outcome. Because the next time Bob walked into a medical office, it wasn't for advice. It was for proof. And what happened between that quiet driveway and that impossible report on the doctor's desk is the part no one talks about. But it changes everything. Bob Harris didn't come from gyms or fitness programs. He came from Denton, Texas, a place where strength wasn't something you trained. It was something you proved. His father worked oil fields. His grandfather built fences under a brutal sun. Nobody talked about nutrition plans or protein intake. You didn't measure strength. You lived it. And Bob lived it well. For 31 years, he worked construction in Phoenix, not behind a desk, on the ground, hauling materials, climbing scaffolding, moving through 110-degree heat like it was just another Tuesday. His body wasn't built for show. It was built for function. For carrying weight, solving problems, finishing jobs. By the time he retired at 63, he was still strong, still steady, still the kind of man younger workers watched carefully, quietly adjusting themselves in comparison. People said hard work kept him young. For most of his life, they were right. But then, everything changed. Not dramatically, not all at once. It started the day the work stopped. No more lifting, no more daily strain, no more constant demand forcing his body to adapt. What had built him for decades disappeared almost overnight. And slowly, quietly, his body responded. Not with pain, not with illness, with loss. At 65, it was subtle. A strange fatigue after simple tasks. A burn in his legs that didn't feel like effort. It felt like warning. He ignored it. Blamed the heat, blamed the day. But the excuses didn't last. By 66, stairs required thought. By 67, yard work stretched from 2 hours to 4. He began sitting in the shower, not because he wanted to, but because standing too long made his legs tremble in a way he couldn't explain. He told Carol he was just tired. She didn't believe him. There was no diagnosis waiting in his blood work. No dramatic condition to point at, to fight, to name. He was simply disappearing, 1 pound of muscle at a time. And the system he trusted most didn't see it as a problem to solve, only something to accept. I don't feel right. Bob said it once. And for a man like him, that was everything. He had worked through broken ribs, torn muscles, pain that would have stopped most men in their tracks. But saying those 4 words out loud to another person felt unnatural, almost like admitting something he had spent his entire life refusing to admit. Something had forced it. His doctor, Dr. Paulson, did what doctors do. Blood pressure, cholesterol, glucose, thyroid. The routine checklist of a body slowing down. Everything came back normal. Normal numbers, normal ranges, normal aging. And then came the sentence that quietly rewrote Bob's future. This is just what happens after 65. Muscle loss, lower energy, reduced strength. Nothing alarming, nothing fixable. Just aging. Bob sat there, listening, nodding, accepting at least on the surface. So there's nothing I can do. Pause. A careful answer. Light exercise. Eat enough protein. But the trajectory, it is what it is. The goal now is to manage it. Manage it. Not fight it. Not reverse it. Manage it. Bob drove home in silence. Ate dinner like nothing had changed. Watched the news. Went to bed. But at 2:47 in the morning, staring into the dark, something inside him refused to settle. What he was experiencing wasn't a final stage. It was a process. A biological one. And processes can be interrupted, corrected, reversed. But Bob didn't know that yet. So for months, he followed instructions, walked more, stretched, tried to manage, and kept getting weaker until one night, across the kitchen table, Carol finally said what he couldn't. Bobby, I'm scared. No drama. No panic. Just truth. I don't need you to manage this. A pause. I need you to fight it. Bob looked down at his hands, the same hands that had built a lifetime of strength. And for the first time in years, something shifted. No plan. No roadmap. Just a decision. He stopped accepting answers and started asking better questions. Now here's the part Bob's doctor never explained. Because what was happening inside his body wasn't random. It was precise. Your muscles are not static. Every day, your body breaks them down and rebuilds them in a constant cycle. When you're younger, that cycle stays balanced. You lose a little, you rebuild a little. Strength holds. But after 50, especially after 60, that balance starts to tilt. Not because your body stops working, but because it stops responding. The process is called anabolic resistance, and it changes everything. In simple terms, your muscles stop reacting properly to the very signals that are supposed to rebuild them. The most important of those signals comes from protein, specifically an amino acid called leucine. Leucine is the trigger. But in an aging body, that same meal barely moves the needle. The signal weakens, the switch stays off, and muscle loss quietly accelerates, meal after meal, day after day. Now here's where it gets worse. Bob wasn't just missing the signal, his body was actively resisting it, because another factor was working against him at the same time. Vitamin D deficiency, not dramatic, not obvious, but critical. Vitamin D directly supports the fast twitch muscle fibers, the ones responsible for strength, balance, and catching yourself before a fall. When levels drop, those fibers weaken first. The exact weakness Bob was feeling in his legs, it wasn't random. It was targeted loss. And then there was the final piece, the one almost nobody talks about. Neostatin? A natural protein in your body designed to limit muscle growth, a build and break system. As you age, that break gets stronger. At the exact moment your body is getting weaker. So now imagine the full picture. The signal to build muscle is weaker. The response to that signal is blunted. And the system actively holding you back is getting stronger. That's not aging. That's a biological trap. And Bob was stuck inside it, being told to stretch. Let's step away from the science for a moment. Because what Bob was losing wasn't just muscle. It was something much harder to measure. Bob Harris had always been the capable one. The man people called when something needed fixing. The one who showed up early, stayed late, and never asked for help. Strength wasn't just something he had, it was who he was. And now, quietly, that identity was slipping. The first thing Carol noticed, he stopped offering. Small things at first, carrying groceries, fixing something around the house. He would pause, hesitate, then step back. Not because he didn't want to help, because he wasn't sure he could. He started choosing where to sit, always somewhere easier to stand from. He avoided low couches, avoided stairs when he could, adjusting constantly in ways no one else could see, except Carol. Sunday dinners became less frequent, then occasional, then rare. Not because he didn't love his family, but because getting up from that couch without thinking, without planning, had become something he could no longer guarantee. And he couldn't let them see that. One afternoon, his grandson asked Carol, "Is Grandpa okay?" She smiled, said yes, then cried when no one could hear her. The nights were worse. And then one night, it happened. No warning, no stumble, just a step, and his legs gave out. He hit the floor hard. Silence. He stayed there longer than he needed to, not because he couldn't get up, But because something about that moment felt final, he didn't call for Carol. He pulled himself up slowly, using the edge of the tub, and stood there in the dark, staring at a version of himself he didn't recognize. And in that moment, something broke. Or maybe something woke up. Because when he walked back to bed that night, he wasn't thinking about decline anymore. He was thinking about solutions. And Bob Harris had spent his entire life solving problems. The breakthrough didn't come from a specialist. It didn't come from a second opinion, a hospital, or a prescription. It came from a hardware store. A random Wednesday morning, Bob was standing in the fastener aisle, comparing 2 boxes of screws. Old habits never leave. When a man beside him spoke. Take the shorter ones, less splitting. They started talking. Nothing serious, just 2 older men passing time. But then the man, Frank, watched Bob move, the careful shifting, the hesitation before reaching, and then he said something that stopped everything. Your body's not done building, it's waiting. Bob turned. My doctor says I'm past that. Frank shrugged, calm, certain. Your doctor's working off old information. That was it. No pitch, no lecture, just a crack in everything Bob had been told. They talked for 40 minutes in that aisle. Before leaving, Frank wrote 3 things on the back of a receipt and handed it over. Look into these. Bob went home and didn't stop reading. That night turned into hours. Hours turned into something else. Because what he found wasn't a miracle. It was worse than that. It was simple. 3 things. Not expensive, not complicated. Just ignored. The first, protein, but not the way he'd been told. Not total intake. Timing. Dosage, per meal. Enough to trigger the signal his body had stopped responding to. The second, vitamin D. Not casually low, functionally deficient. Directly tied to the exact weakness in his legs. The third, creatine. Something he thought was for young athletes, but the research said otherwise. Together, these weren't supplements. They were signals. Signals his body had been missing for years. And for the first time since that doctor's visit, Bob didn't feel confused. He felt clear, because this wasn't decline anymore. This was a system, and systems can be rebuilt. Here's the part most people get wrong about Bob Harris. They think he's an exception, a rare case, an outlier, someone who got lucky. He's not. And that's exactly why this matters, because what happened to Bob has already been demonstrated in labs, in studies, in controlled trials, over and over again. One study out of McMaster University took men between 65 and 80. Sedentary, weak, declining on paper, identical to Bob, 12 weeks, resistance training, higher protein, nothing extreme. The result? Not just stronger muscles. New muscle tissue that was at a cellular level, indistinguishable from men decades younger. Same structure, same function, same capability. That shouldn't be possible. But it is. And here's the uncomfortable truth. The research exists. The data is clear. But it hasn't reached the places it needs to reach. Because in most medical settings, aging is still treated as a one-way path. Manage decline, slow it down, adapt to it, not reverse it, not rebuild. And that gap between what's known and what's practiced is where people like Bob get lost. Told to accept something that isn't final, guided toward coping instead of correcting. Meanwhile, an entire industry has built itself on that confusion, selling complex solutions to a simple problem. Expensive formulas, branded blends, monthly subscriptions, all built on science that already exists, just repackaged. Because the truth, it doesn't sell as well. The truth is simple. The body isn't broken. It's understimulated, undersignaled, undersupported. And when you change those signals, everything changes. Bob didn't discover something new. He rediscovered something fundamental. Something that had been there the whole time, ignored, overlooked, but waiting. Just like his body had been, waiting for the right signal. Understanding changed everything. But action, that was different. Because knowing what to do doesn't mean your body is ready to do it. Bob started small, 3 days a week. No gym, no trainers. Just a set of adjustable dumbbells, resistance bands, and a pull-up bar fixed into a doorway Carol didn't trust for the first month. The plan was simple. Compound movements, controlled reps, nothing flashy. But the first week, it hurt. Not the satisfying burn he remembered from years on job sites. This was deeper, slower, a soreness that made him question if he was rebuilding or breaking something further. For the first time in decades, he doubted himself. But he kept going. Because this time, he wasn't guessing. He understood what was happening beneath the surface, the signals, the thresholds, the biology. Every rep wasn't exercise. It was communication. At the same time, he changed how he ate. Not more food, smarter timing. Protein spread across meals, not stacked at night. Enough at breakfast to actually trigger something. Enough at lunch to reinforce it. Enough at dinner to sustain it. He added what he had ignored his entire life. Sardines, eggs, yogurt, simple foods, strong signals. Every morning, creatine. Every day, vitamin D. No shortcuts. No missed days. The first 6 weeks were the hardest. Progress didn't feel obvious, but something was happening. Quietly, at week 8, it showed. He stood up from a chair and didn't think about it. No planning, no hesitation. Just movement, natural, automatic, the way it used to be. He paused, did it again, then called Carol. She watched him stand, again and again. And this time, she didn't say anything. She just cried, because this wasn't effort anymore. This was return. Progress didn't explode. It accumulated, week by week, rep by rep, meal by meal. The tremble in his legs, the one that had haunted him in the shower, began to fade, not instantly, but steadily, like something loosening its grip. By month 3, he noticed something strange. He stopped thinking about movement. Stairs were just stairs again. Chairs were just chairs. The constant background calculation, the quiet negotiation his body had been forcing on him was gone. And with it, something else returned. Confidence? Not loud, not dramatic, but real. He started showing up again. Sunday dinners, yard work, small repairs around the house, nothing heroic, just normal. But normal, for Bob, had become extraordinary. One afternoon, his grandson handed him a box to carry. No hesitation. No second thought. Bob took it. And in that moment, something invisible shifted. Because it wasn't about the weight of the box. It was about what it represented. Capability. By month 6, the changes were undeniable. Strength tests improved. Balance returned. Even his posture, something he had never paid attention to, began correcting itself without effort. Carol noticed first. "You're standing different," she said. Bob didn't respond. But he knew she was right. Because this wasn't just physical recovery. It was structural. Inside his body, systems were waking up, responding again, rebuilding. And then came the moment that brought everything full circle. The appointment, the scan, the numbers that didn't make sense. The same ones that made a doctor read a report 4 times. Because Bob Harris, at 74, was no longer declining. He was rebuilding. And this time, there was proof. Here's what matters most about Bob Harris. Not the scans, not the numbers, not even the transformation. It's the moment before all of it. The moment in his truck. The moment at 2:47 in the morning. The moment on the bathroom floor. Because that's where the story actually begins. Not with science, not with solutions, but with a decision. Bob was told to manage decline, to accept it, to adjust his life around something that felt inevitable. And for a while, he did, until something didn't sit right, until quiet discomfort turned into a question, and that question turned into action. That's the part most people miss. Because the information, it's out there. The research exists. The methods are simple, but none of it matters until you decide not to accept the default path, because what Bob discovered wasn't a secret. It was a gap between what's known and what's applied. And inside that gap, millions of people are slowly giving up strength they could still keep. Not because they have to, because they were never told they didn't have to. So here's the real question. Not what happened to Bob, but what happens to you? Because if your body is changing, if things are getting harder, if strength is slipping in ways you haven't fully faced yet, then you're standing in the same place Bob once stood, and the path in front of you looks the same. One direction is familiar, accepted, expected. The other, uncertain, but possible. And it starts the same way it did for him, with one decision, not to manage it, but to fight it.